They expected her to leave. That was the assumption rippling quietly through the ranks, that after dismantling the illusion of authority, she would turn and walk away, letting the weight of what happened settle on its own. That's how legends usually ended, with distance. She didn't. Instead, she stood there as medics hurried in from the edge of the field, not for the officer. His pride had taken the worst hit, but for the formation itself. Shock, after all, came in many forms. She watched them work, eyes sharp, taking in details others missed. Rigid shoulders, locked jaws, the way some soldiers still hadn't exhaled. This wasn't over. The officer cleared his throat again, louder this time, as if volume could repair what fracture had done. "You've made your point," he said. "We can resume." She raised one finger, not aggressive, not dismissive. "Final, no," she said. "Now we address the cost." That word, cost, cut deeper than any reprimand. She stepped forward, boots slow, deliberate, until she stood directly in front of him. The height difference was noticeable. So was the shift in gravity. He straightened instinctively, as if standing taller might balance the scales. It didn't. "You've led this unit for years," she said. "You know their strengths, their weaknesses, and today you chose fear instead of trust." His jaw tightened. "Discipline requires pressure, so does steel," she replied, "but too much pressure shatters it." A few soldiers exchanged quick glances. This wasn't a private correction. This was accountability, rare, exposed, and uncomfortable. She turned slightly, addressing both him and the formation. "Authority that depends on humiliation is already failing. It just hasn't been challenged yet." The officer opened his mouth, then stopped. Whatever defense he had prepared dissolved under the certainty in her voice. He looked around, at the soldiers, at the dust, at the ground where he had fallen. For the first time, he nodded without hesitation. "I misjudged," he said quietly. The words barely carried, but they landed like thunder. No one laughed, no one whispered. Respect didn't surge, it settled, heavy, permanent. She didn't press further. She didn't savor the moment. Instead, she did something unexpected. She extended her hand, not to help him up. He was already standing, but to close the gap between command and consequence. After a brief pause, he took it. The handshake was firm, brief, and witnessed by every soldier on that field. "Then we move forward," she said. She turned back to the formation. "You don't follow perfection," she continued. "You follow honesty. Remember that when you lead others." A beat passed. Then, one by one, soldiers straightened, not snapping to attention, not waiting for instruction, but aligning themselves naturally. A quiet, collective decision. She stepped back, allowing space for the officer to reclaim his role. But now it was different. Shared, grounded, real. As she walked toward the edge of the training ground, dust rising softly behind her boots, the soldiers' eyes followed, not out of awe this time, but understanding. They had just witnessed something rarer than strength. They had seen power corrected, and none of them would ever forget what it looked like when authority fell and chose to stand back up the right way. The realization didn't come all at once. It spread quietly, like a delayed echo, moving through the formation in fragments. Whispers behind sealed lips, glances that lingered a second too long on the insignia she wore, the way officers at the perimeter suddenly stood a little straighter when her name reached them. She hadn't announced herself. Someone else had. A captain near the rear stiffened, eyes narrowing as he leaned toward another officer. A sergeant's face went pale. A lieutenant swallowed hard and looked down, then back up, as if hoping the patch on her chest might change if he stared long enough. It didn't. Her name carried weight, not rumor, weight, record, weight, deployments, commendations, decisions made under fire that had saved lives and ended careers. She wasn't just senior, she was proven. And the fact that she had stood there quietly, letting assumptions bury themselves, made the revelation sharper. The officer she had confronted felt it fully now. He stood still, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid, as if bracing against a truth he could no longer avoid. He had been so certain of hierarchy, of visibility, of how power announced itself. He had believed rank arrived with ceremony. It didn't. It arrived with silence. She noticed the shift without reacting to it. That was the unsettling part. No satisfaction, no triumph, just focus. Her eyes moved across the field, assessing readiness the way others assessed threat. "Form up," she said calmly. The order rippled outward. Boots adjusted, lines tightened. The unit responded with precision that surprised even them, not because they feared her, but because they trusted the clarity of her command. She walked the line again, slower this time. As she passed, soldiers caught fragments of detail they had missed before. The worn edge of her gloves, the faint scar near her wrist, the way her gaze lingered on posture and spacing rather than faces. She wasn't measuring obedience, she was measuring cohesion. She stopped near the center. "You were told leadership looks like control," she said, "that it announces itself, that it must be seen to be real." She turned slightly, allowing the officer to remain in her peripheral vision without becoming the focus. "That's false. The most dangerous leaders don't need to be noticed to be obeyed." A few soldiers nodded unconsciously before stopping themselves. She continued, "Real authority shows up early, listens first, and corrects before damage spreads." The officer shifted, not defensively this time, thoughtfully. "I failed to recognize you," he said, voice steady but stripped of edge. "That failure is mine." She met his eyes fully now. "Recognition is not the issue," she replied. "Assumption is." The words settled heavily. She turned back to the formation. "Some of you assumed today would be about endurance. Some assumed it would be about intimidation. Others assumed it would be about proving something." She paused. "None of that matters. What mattered," she explained, "was decision, making under pressure. The ability to read intent, to adapt when certainty collapsed, to lead without needing permission from pride. It doesn't need louder commands," she said. "It needs sharper judgment." The wind picked up, snapping the flag overhead. Dust swirled briefly, then fell away. She took a step back, creating space again, not retreating, but concluding. "You'll resume training," she said, but not as before. The officer nodded once, understood. This time, the response came from him without hesitation, and from the unit without doubt. As she walked toward the transport vehicle waiting at the edge of the field, no one spoke, no salutes snapped, no formalities interrupted the moment. Yet every soldier there felt it. They hadn't just learned who she was. They had learned what leadership looked like when it didn't need to announce itself, and how easily it exposed those who thought it always would. The shift didn't sound dramatic. There was no cheer, no shout, no single moment anyone could point to and say that's when it happened. Instead, respect moved through the formation the way alignment does, quietly, inevitably, until everything clicked into place. One soldier adjusted his stance, another followed. Then, as if guided by an unspoken signal, spines straightened across the line. Not rigid, ready, breathing evened, hands settled naturally. The unit wasn't reacting anymore, it was responding. She noticed first, leaders always do. Her gaze lifted, scanning posture, spacing, awareness. The tension she had felt earlier, sharp, unstable, had smoothed into something solid. This was what cohesion looked like when fear stepped aside. She stopped at the front, eyes front, she said, not louder than before. Just clearer. They complied instantly. Even the officer felt it now. He stood slightly behind her, no longer fighting for presence, no longer trying to dominate the moment. Instead, he observed, learned. His expression wasn't humbled, it was recalibrated. She clasped her hands behind her back, mirroring the stance of command without exaggeration. "You don't earn respect by demanding it," she said. "You earn it by making the right decision when no one is watching." A few soldiers swallowed hard. Others clenched their jaws. The words landed differently now because the ground had shifted beneath them. "Every one of you will lead at some point," she continued. "Maybe not today, maybe not here, but when that moment comes, remember what just happened." She turned slightly, gesturing to the space behind her, not the officer himself, but the memory of the confrontation. "Pressure reveals intent," she said, "and intent reveals character." The unit stood perfectly still, but their attention burned forward, focused, alive. She nodded once. That was the signal. Boots snapped together in unison. The sound cracked through the air, sharp, clean, absolute. They had moved to attention without being ordered to. The officer inhaled slowly. He had spent years commanding movements like that. He knew what it meant when soldiers did it on their own. She hadn't taken his authority. She had earned theirs. She stepped back half a pace, allowing him space to step forward. He did, meeting the formation with a new awareness. "Training resumes," he said. The unit responded instantly, but their eyes flicked briefly, respectfully, toward her before returning forward. She turned away then, walking toward the edge of the ground. The sun dipped slightly, casting longer shadows now. Dust clung to her boots, to the hem of her trousers, evidence of a moment that would outlast the day. Behind her, drills restarted. Commands rang out. Movement returned, but something essential had changed. They moved with purpose now, not fear of correction, but confidence in clarity. As she reached the transport, a young soldier near the front allowed himself one final glance. He didn't smile, he didn't salute, he remembered, and that was enough, because respect, once earned without force, doesn't fade when the leader walks away. The sun was low now, bleeding gold across the training ground. Long shadows stretched behind the soldiers as drills wound down, the rhythm of commands softer, more measured. The dust that had once hung thick with tension settled into the grooves of the earth, as if the ground itself was keeping a record of what had happened. She stood at the edge of the field, alone. The transport waited with its engine idling, but she didn't board it immediately. She watched the unit one last time, not to check compliance, but to understand what would remain after she was gone. Posture, awareness, purpose. The subtle signs told her everything she needed to know. Behind her, movement caught her attention. The officer approached. He stopped a few paces away, careful not to intrude. The space between them was deliberate now, no longer charged, just respectful. "I won't forget today," he said quietly. She nodded once. "Neither will they." He hesitated, then added, "You could have humiliated me." "I wasn't here to do that," she replied. "I was here to make sure this unit survives its next mistake." The words lingered between them, heavy with truth. He straightened. "They'll be better for it." "Yes," she said, "if you let them." That was all. No handshake this time, no ceremony, just understanding. She turned and walked toward the transport. Each step was unhurried, steady, fading into the lengthening shadows. The sun dipped lower, igniting the horizon in quiet fire. On the field, something unexpected happened. One soldier, then another, raised a hand in salute, not sharp, not formal, instinctive. The motion rippled through the formation until dozens of hands were raised, held just long enough to matter. She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need to. The salute wasn't for her presence. It was for what she left behind. The transport door closed softly. The engine note deepened. As the vehicle rolled away, the soldiers lowered their hands and returned to their tasks. But with a difference. Movements were cleaner, commands clearer, trust woven quietly into every action. The officer watched until the transport disappeared beyond the dust and light. He finally understood what had unsettled him most that day. She hadn't taken command, she had changed it. Long after the sun slipped below the horizon and the field fell silent, the lesson remained, etched not into reports or ranks, but into memory. Because true strength doesn't demand to be seen, it is felt, and once felt, it never truly leaves. Weeks later, the training ground looked the same dust, same flags snapping in the wind, same lines of soldiers moving through drills under the open sky. To an outsider, nothing had changed, but to those who had been there, everything had. A recruit corrected his stance without being shouted at. A sergeant paused before barking an order, choosing precision over volume. An officer stepped in early, calmly, before frustration turned into fear. Small moments, invisible moments, they were the proof. Her name surfaced occasionally, in after-action reviews, in quiet conversations between senior staff, in the rare tone of respect that carried no bitterness. She never returned to that base. She didn't need to. The lesson had taken root. The officer who once stood humiliated now stood differently, not softer, steadier. He listened longer, he spoke less, and when he did, his words carried weight instead of noise. Those under his command noticed, performance improved, mistakes were corrected sooner, trust replaced tension. One evening, as the sun dipped low and drills ended, a young soldier asked an older one, who was she? The older soldier thought for a moment before answering. She was the reason we train like this now. He said, no rank, no title, just truth. Far away, she moved on to her next assignment, her next responsibility, her next quiet correction of systems that didn't yet know they were broken. No headlines followed her, no applause waited at the end. That was fine. She had never worked for recognition. She worked for impact, and impact, unlike authority borrowed from fear, doesn't fade with distance or time. It lives on, in decisions made under pressure, in leaders who pause before they dominate, in soldiers who understand that strength is measured not by how loudly you command, but by how deeply you're trusted. The dust would settle, the day would pass, but the echo of that moment, the day power was corrected instead of defended, would remain, quiet, permanent. It became tradition without anyone naming it. On the first difficult day of training, the one when voices usually rose, when doubt crept in and confidence cracked, someone would mention it, not formally, not in a briefing, just a quiet line spoken while adjusting gear or catching breath. You know this ground's different, someone would say. A new recruit might laugh. It's just dirt. The older ones never argued. They just exchanged a look. Later, when exhaustion set in and tempers flared, that look would return. And the shouting wouldn't come, corrections would, calm ones, precise ones. That was when the story surfaced, not exaggerated, not polished, just the truth. They talked about the day authority met certainty, about the woman who didn't raise her voice, didn't announce herself, didn't need permission to change the tone of an entire unit. They talked about how fear had failed, and how control, real control, had replaced it. She didn't win. One soldier would say, she aligned us. The recruits listened closely then, because every soldier eventually learns that strength isn't what breaks others. It's what holds people together when pressure hits hardest. Years passed, assignments changed, promotions came, some transferred out. Others stayed long enough to train the next generation, but the lesson moved with them, quietly embedded in how they led fire teams, squads, platoons. When tension rose, they remembered. When anger tempted, they paused. When authority felt fragile, they chose clarity, and sometimes, rarely meaningfully, when someone crossed a line thinking rank would protect them, the room would fall silent in exactly the same way it had that day. That silence carried memory, not of humiliation, not of fear, of correction done right. Somewhere far from that base, she continued her work, other systems, other people, other moments where power needed to be steadied instead of displayed. She never knew how often her name was spoken there. She didn't need to, because legacy doesn't belong to the one who leaves it. It belongs to those who live by it. And on that training ground, long after boots stopped echoing and flags were replaced, one truth remained unchallenged. The strongest leaders don't command obedience. They create it and then trust others to carry it forward.